programs mandated by the Code of Virginia to be provided through the local departments of social services. The structure of our programs, I better look over here so I can see. The Department for Aging and Rehabilitative Services, or DARS, and that's where Carrie and I work now, has state oversight for the APS division. The APS program is state supervised and locally administered through 120 local departments of social services. So each one of the 120 local departments of social services does have an adult protective services program. Practice is based on policy, and policy is developed in response to the Code of Virginia state law. All right, now this might be a little bit hard to see. I can't hardly see it at all. They just told me I had to have cataract surgery to go. All right, but this is our division. We have quite a few, I think it's 17 people in our division now, in the Adult Protective Services division at DARS. That is pretty unheard of, I have to tell you. When I started in APS back in the 1990s, Terry Smith, some of you may know her. Terry Smith was the program manager. Joy Duke was the APS program consultant. I was doing adult services. We had somebody for DB, and then the administrative person. So we had 5 people forever. So I have just people to know that in my lifetime, we've worked hard to expand that. So Paige McCleary is the division director. Kathy Hayfield is our commissioner of DARS. And Ms. Carey is the program manager. And we have 2 new people who work exclusively with adult services now, like home-based care and such. And they also do the guardianship program. And then we have 5 regional consultants. I handle the central region, but we've got all the regions covered, and we provide assistance, answer questions to the local departments of social services, try to be a resource as best we can, review some cases, and monitor the programs and maybe do a little training. So for the local departments of social services, they're really the ones who are boots on the ground, and I just have so much respect and admiration for everything that they do. How many are APS folks here? Oh, wow, okay, great. Thank you for what you do. I'm always just amazed. Okay, the philosophy of APS, we advocate for individuals who are at risk. We promote the least restrictive and intrusive intervention. I'm sure you hear that all the time, the least restrictive method to help someone. We preserve one's right to make one's own decisions or to delegate decision-making authority. Apply a person-centered, family-based approach to services, assessment, planning, and delivery. And one thing that's kind of an overriding theme of APS is the adult has the right to make decisions unless they are determined to be incapacitated. So they can make bad decisions. None of us ever make bad decisions, do we? But regardless of what the community may think, the family may think, we're supposed to be considering what the adult wants. All right, fund slide, APS funding. Since I've been in the program, there's been no federal funding for APS. And that changed in 2021 when we got a pretty nice pot of money from the feds on 2 occasions. The way we're normally funded is the social services block grant comes down. There's a 20% match required when the local departments spend their SSBG allocation. So that's the money that comes to Virginia, and then the legislators decide they parcel it out. So that's where APS basically gets its funding. But in June 2021, we did get $2 million from the federal government for COVID relief funds. That money will expire September 2023, so we're actively trying to encourage all the local departments. I know they get tired of hearing from me spend their money because it will go away. And this is a nice opportunity. Some of the allowable things they can do is some public awareness, equipment, new computers, new phones. But it all has to be specifically for APS. And go to conferences, so that's been a big boom too. So we're really encouraging to use that money and be creative. And then we got another pot of money, $4,000 from the American Rescue Plan Act, or ARPA. And this money can be used for basically the same things as the COVID relief, with the addition of it can also be used to provide some adult services money for like companion, children, homemaker services. And the ARPA money is, we have a little more time to use that. That goes through September 2024. And I'll just put my little soapbox comment in here that I always make. We all know that children's services, they get busloads of federal money. And I hope one day in my lifetime we'll see that coming down from the feds for APS as well. But even when I started at the Department of Social Services and APS in the 90s, we had our 5 little people, our little group tucked away in the corner, and Child Welfare Services had like 3 floors of people. That was just the honest truth. I never did understand it, but it's getting a little better. Baby steps, that's what we have. All right, the service population for APS are adults who are age 60 and older, or if they're 18 to 59 and are incapacitated, who have been abused, neglected, or exploited, or are at risk of being abused, neglected, or exploited, without regard to income or resources. We take APS cases regardless of whether a person is indigent or they're Mr. Rockefeller. We take all the reports, and all of them do have to be investigated. It's not a choice of the individual. The Code of Virginia says we will investigate. Now, sometimes we don't always get cooperation, same from everybody, but it does have to be investigated. All right, the population of incapacitated adults. It's an adult who is impaired by mental illness, intellectual disability, physical illness or disability, advanced age, and other causes, to the extent that the adult lacks sufficient understanding or capacity to make, communicate, or carry out reasonable decisions regarding their well-being, and that's in one of our regulations. This does not include every person who receives disability benefits. Some folks seem to think that if you get SSI that you're automatically in, but you may be able perfectly fine to make decisions to take care of yourself and such, so that would not qualify. So it does not include all individuals with disabilities. It also does not mean that there's been a court ruling of incapacity and a guardian has been appointed. So we don't require that ruling to have been made in order for someone to be eligible for APS services. And it does not include situations where the person is no longer at risk. And this is kind of a toughie for some people in the community who don't understand. They will say something horrible happened in a nursing facility, and it may have been really horrible. But for as far as that person left, they went to another facility, they went home. And in that case, that would be considered an invalid report, and we would not investigate it because the person's no longer at risk. However, we would refer that to, say, maybe the Department of Health if it's a nursing facility, Department of Social Services, Division of Licensing if it's an assisted living, law enforcement. We just have lots of options. We don't let it go. But for APS, that case would close. Okay, now we have, wanted to show you a new public service announcement. This just came out. I believe some of the ARPA money was used for this, but it is available to the local departments to show in their communities.
Hey Deb, the pharmacy called. Oh, like you still haven't picked up your heart medication. Are you alright?
Hi, Frank, it's Sally. I got your voicemail earlier. So your nephew asked you for another loan?
Hey, this is your neighbor, Mike. Looks like you're pretty bruised up. Your caregiver said you about. Is that right?
Yes, this is Julie from the doctor's office. I'm sorry, it seems you missed another appointment today. Are you having trouble getting a ride?
It's on all of us to prevent and address abuse, neglect, self-neglect, and exploitation. Know the signs of abuse and who to contact. Essential community services are available to help. Adult Protective Services is a pillar in our community, ensuring confidentiality and respecting the rights of every adult. Don't let your call go unanswered. Call APS or visit our website to learn more.
YouTube is the new home of NFL Sunday Ticket. Catch our most on.
Well, I'm so sorry. I understand that didn't show, but did you enjoy listening to it? But if you pull up our presentation on the website, the link is there for you to see it. And I really encourage you to do it because it is pretty powerful, I think. And Carrie just told me that there are two on here. There's one that you can go and look at, and the one on the DARS website can be used for public broadcasting. If you wanted to make
I'm sorry.
did I get it backwards?
I'll just chime in real quick. So there are actually, if anyone at the local departments is interested, a broadcast was issued, and there are two different types of files. If you want to put it on your website, we have a file for that. If you have a local broadcasting network or TV channel or something like that, if you want to, have the commercial air on television, we have separate files for that, and you can either reach out to myself or your regional consultant, and we can make sure you get those files.
Okay, thank you. I apologize that didn't show. All right, moving on. Who can make an APS report? Well, First, we have mandated reporters, and I would venture to say that everyone, or most everyone in this room is a mandated reporter. Mandated reporters are required by law to report immediately or be subject to a civil money penalty. Anonymous reports are also accepted. The code, it's up there, Code of Virginia 63.2-1606 does state who all the mandated reporters are, and they need to make the report immediately, either to the free APS hotline number, or you can call the local Department of Social Services directly. And on this slide, you can see there's a link to go for mandated reporter training. It's kind of a fun little interactive. It's not very long. I think it takes about an hour, if that, to complete for mandated reporters. It's a good resource. For financial institutions, generally financial institutions are what we call voluntary reporters, but they must report to APS within 5 business days when they refuse to execute a transaction or delay a transaction. They will often do this if they suspect that something's a little wonky there and just want to look into that a little bit more. So I'm glad we do have that caveat. Then, of course, anyone can report voluntarily. Anyone who witnesses adult abuse, neglect, or exploitation, and also the individual, him or herself. Anyone who experiences abuse, neglect, or exploitation can report. And again, these reports can be anonymous. And lots of thought here. Reporters are kept confidential. We do not tell anyone, even though we get lots of requests from people who are determined to be alleged perpetrators, and who called me in. We get that sort of thing all the time, but APS is not allowed to disclose that unless the individual, the person, the client who's involved agrees to have that shared, or a judge orders it through a court order. And in my bazillion years, I have never known about a case where a judge ordered that, but who knows? And this is just a little slide about who are mandated reporters. Some of them are doctors, dentists, nurses, guardians, social workers, law enforcement, mental health professionals, and any person who is employed by or contracted with a public or private agency or facility who works with adults in an administrative, supportive, or direct care capacity. That one's pretty all-encompassing, brings a lot of people in there. And also any person providing full, intermittent, or occasional care to an adult for compensation, including but not limited to companion, chore, homemaker, or personal care workers. And that list is, again, in the Code of Virginia. Did everybody see themselves in this list in some way? Did anybody not? All right, it happens. All right. We did bring some mandated reporter brochures. They're pretty much hot off the press from doors, and they were left out front. So if you want to grab a few to take back to your agency to share with people who don't know they're mandated reporters, that could be a great idea. Reporters do have rights. They are immune from civil is criminal liability. They are to protect the identity of the reporter, the report and evidence received by the local Department of Social Services, and any written findings, evaluations, records, and recommended actions shall be confidential and shall be exempt from disclosure requirements of the Virginia Freedom of Information Act. Fairly often at NARS, we do get requests for APS records through the Freedom of Information Act, but we are not allowed to provide them that way. And then there's malicious reports, and I have seen this happen. Any person 14 years of age or older who makes or causes to be made a report that he or she knows to be false shall be guilty of a Class 4 misdemeanor. And any subsequent convictions of this provision shall be a Class 2 misdemeanor. And one thing I also wanted to say about reporting to APS is that if someone has an inkling, a little niggle that something's just not right, that there may be some abuse, neglect, or exploitation, go ahead and call that in, either to the hotline or the local Department of Social Services, because the APS workers are the ones who will review, determine if the report is valid. We have certain criteria that Ms. Gary will go over about that, but you don't have to have firm evidence that something has happened. That's the job of the APS worker. And again, to report to the local department, and here is the hotline number for Adult Protective Services. There's also a link on here to all the local departments if you want to make a report directly to the local department, which I always try to recommend people to do that rather than a hotline, because with the hotline sometimes it has to take a little journey here and there, but it's good to talk directly to the local department. And with that, I'll turn it over to Ms. Glen.
Thank you, Margie. So also, just real quick, the APS division is working on a way to make reports online. So anybody can just fill out online. So hopefully we'll see that sometime in 2024. It's a lot of work, and it's very, very detailed. And you have to make sure that everything flows exactly the way it's supposed to. So hopefully we'll see that sometime like spring, summer of 2024, maybe a little bit after that, I don't know, but we'll see. So that's something to look forward to, and it's very exciting. As far as validity goes and the criteria as to what makes an APS report move forward to the investigation, the person has to be 6 years older or 18 to 59 and incapacitated, as Margie was mentioning earlier. The subject has to be living, identifiable, and able to be located. So even if you don't know the person's name, Jane Doe, John Doe, or whatever, as long as you can find them and you have enough information, descriptive information, and where we can locate them, it's okay if you don't know their name. The allegation has to include, the report has to include allegations of abuse, neglect, or exploitation. And then the local department has to be the one that has jurisdiction. If they don't, we transfer that report to the locality that does have the proper jurisdiction. So what is abuse? The key word here is willful. The willful infliction of pain, injury, mental anguish, or unreasonable confinement of an adult. And so I often give this presentation to folks who are like CNAs or personal care aides and things like that. Is anybody in the nursing field or, okay, CNA? Yeah, sometimes there, accidents can happen. Sometimes I bruise super easy. I got bruises on my arm and I don't even know how I got them. So just because there is a bruise, it doesn't always necessarily mean that abuse has actually like occurred, because it may not have been a willful infliction of pain, right? So we still encourage you to make those reports so that we can investigate that, but just understand that sometimes, things can happen, or, if a client is a little bit combative or resistant or something like that, you both might actually fall down and you both might actually get hurt. So sometimes it's not always abuse, but we do want to investigate, so please make those phone calls. Some indicators for adult abuse: I mentioned bruising, lacerations, skin tears, fractures, patterned injuries, physical restraints, somebody who's got a change in behavior, fear, confusion, depression, anxiety, isolation, when somebody has someone, locked in the back bedroom, the door closed, no TV, no music, no nothing, that type of thing. Sometimes an indicator is when someone's afraid of being touched, that can mean a wide variety of things, but it could mean verbal threats, intimidation, and that's just, I read a couple, a few of them, but there's others on there. And then what is neglect? Neglect is when an adult is living under such circumstances that they're not able to provide for him or herself, or are not being provided the services necessary to maintain their physical and mental health, and that the failure to receive those, services impairs or threatens to impair their well-being. And then self-neglect. So would you guys believe me if I told you that self-neglect is the #1 highest report that we receive? Yeah. The APS workers in the room now, because that's the majority of the investigations that you're doing. But anyway, that's when the adult themselves is not meeting their own basic needs related to mental or physical impairments. Basic needs refer to like food, clothing, shelter, health care, medical care. And like I said, it's the most common type of APS report that we receive and investigate. Sometimes the person themselves, as Marjorie was talking about earlier, with self-reports, they are at home, they may not know where to turn, they might not have very good support systems, rather informal or formal, and then they're like, oh my gosh, I don't even know what to do, but I need help, and they'll call, and they'll kind of, share a lot of the things with us, and then we can go out there, investigate, and help link them with resources and community resources to try to help them. Some of the indicators of neglect, you guys see the list, but is there anything up there that you've seen yourself? Anybody? Yes, sir.
Failing to be able to manage their own finances.
Yeah. And sometimes that's an indicator, and sometimes there's cognitive issues, sometimes, so it could be a wide variety of things, which is why it's so important to make that APS report so we can go out and investigate and determine whether or not there is self-neglect happening, or if they just need some information and referral, and maybe linked up with somebody who can help them, or maybe there's a deeper issue going on, and so that's why we need to be there to determine those things and help them out. Anybody else ever have a story to tell, a short one? No? Okay.
Usually we'll also go in homes that are human and
Say that one more time. I'm
Usually
sorry.
we'll go in homes with human and animal waste.
Yeah, animal waste. Yes, absolutely, or human.
And
I went into a home one time where milk jugs were everywhere, full of urine and 5-gallon buckets from Lowe's and Home Depot of feces. And yeah, so that was fun. Anybody else experience something like that?
The bed bugs are no fun.
Bed bugs. So, okay, very good. Thank you guys for sharing. And then what is exploitation? Exploitation is the unauthorized, improper, or fraudulent use of the adult or his funds, property, benefits, resources, or other assets for another one's profit, benefit, gain, advantage, all of those things. The gentleman that spoke earlier spoke very well about some of these things. And, you know, you hear about human trafficking a lot in reference to children and teenage girls and things, but human trafficking can happen with adults as well, in reference to their Social Security checks, their SSI checks, and things like that. There have been several arrests. I remember one of the worst cases I had ever read about was actually, I think in the Bronx, New York, and they had a bunch of disabled adults down in a basement, not taking care of them, not feeding them, not giving them their medicine, but they sure as heck were taking their checks. So, you know, that they actually were arrested for human trafficking along with many other crimes. So the most common type, though, of exploitation is financial exploitation. And some indicators of that are like unexplained disappearance of funds, valuables. Has anybody ever heard of where like a friend might say, you know, I have known them for 30 years and I have never seen this nephew or heard them talk about them. You know, all of a sudden, nephew's there, new car in the driveway, there's a change in power of attorney all of a sudden, or maybe the deed's been transferred, you know, bills aren't getting paid because the nephew's stealing from, you know, so anyway, if all of a sudden a stranger shows up and they're like, oh, I'm here to help, sometimes that can be an indicator. Transfer of property, savings, and stuff like that, depleted bank accounts, change, like I said, in power of attorney or represented payees, unexplained cash flow, stuff like that. And you know, a lot of times too, it's because the older adult is lonely sometimes. I had a client once, a male client in Portsmouth, Virginia, who he was super duper lonely, and he met a young woman who paid attention to him. Then she gave him a sob story about she and her kid were going to be homeless, and then he's like, well, I have bedrooms. So she moves in, and then she starts talking about how she can't afford to buy the daughter shoes. Next thing you know, he just gives her the debit card, you know, and she just starts spending and spending and spending and spending all of his money. You know, he didn't even realize. He was just, and then when we're talking to him, he's like, I mean, I'm going to die soon probably, so I just enjoy her company. You know, that was a tough one, but, you know, it happens. So what can you expect after you make a report? First, validity of that report is determined. Then, if it is valid, it gets sent for investigation, and the investigation is initiated within 24 hours. And then an unannounced face-to-face visit will happen within 7 days, unless it's determined to be, you know, a little bit more immediate response might be needed, then it'll happen before that 7 days is up. The APS investigation, the workers have up to 45 days to complete that investigation. And then every once in a while it goes beyond the 45 days, but they get a permission from their supervisor, and sometimes it's because they're waiting for bank statements, or they're waiting for the doctor to finish something, or they're waiting for law enforcement. Law enforcement has asked them to hold up for, you know, a little bit longer. But it's not all the time, and it's pretty rare actually, but it does happen. The investigators are only able to share minimal information with reporters because of confidentiality. Just like the gentleman mentioned earlier about confidentiality, we all know about that. And Margie mentioned, you know, sometimes, you know, the public or family members or caregivers get just a tad frustrated because you can't, you know, tell them everything that's happening. Like, oh, I went out there and I did this and we talked about that and blah, blah, blah. Like, we just can't do that because of the confidentiality. And then at the end of the investigation, the investigator will send a letter to the reporter notifying them of the disposition and outcome of that investigation. So just to add, that's like what happens after you make a report, all those steps. And what happens during the course of the investigation is, the worker meets with the adult in person, they meet with the adult privately, they consult with people who have knowledge of the situation, neighbors, family members, doctors, other professionals, anybody that we can count as like what we call a collateral contact, to gain as much knowledge and information as we can. Family, guardians, powers of attorney, anybody. Then we assess the contributing factors of the abuse, neglect, or exploitation, and we assess the adult's capacity to make and carry out decisions for themselves and understanding like the consequences of decisions, like do they really get it, do they understand, can they communicate that with you, and we assess the risk for serious harm. We have 5 different dispositions. We have the adult needs and accepts protective services, and that is when we have the preponderance of evidence, which is like 51% saying, yep, this more than likely happened, right? So you have to have that preponderance of evidence to say that it's a needs and accepts. The preponderance of evidence is going to be there for needs and refuses protective services, as well as a need for protective services no longer exists. For all 3 of those, we need that preponderance of evidence that abuse, neglect, or exploitation is occurring or the risk is there, and so on and so forth. The numbers that you see are how many cases during the fiscal year 2022 ended up with that disposition. And overall, they had, in the state of Virginia, we had 26,747 reports. So that's a lot, and it grows pretty much every year because the population's growing and people are becoming more aware and people are becoming more clever and other people are becoming more desperate, and you always see like different things happening with the economy too. And jobs and things like that. We also have an unfounded disposition, and that's when we don't quite have the preponderance of evidence to say that abuse, neglect, or exploitation has occurred or that they're at risk for it. But what I will say about that is we can have an unfounded disposition for a wide variety of reasons. Sometimes we just plain don't have enough to have that 51%. Other times it's because we never made contact with the client, no matter how hard we tried. They were never home, they refused to talk to us, we didn't have any other collateral contacts. We're leaving business cards and notes on the door, we're sending letters, we're calling, doing everything we can, and if we just don't have it at the end, we have to go with unfounded. And so that's another reason I'd like to say, anytime you suspect, like Margie was saying, just suspect the abuse, neglect, or exploitation, make that call. You don't have to know that it's happening. That's what the APS workers do. You just have to have that suspicion or that weird gut feeling or that something's just not stirring the Kool-Aid on this, something seems weird. So definitely make the call, because when we have a history, there might be unfounded, but then all of a sudden we were able to develop rapport. They finally fully opened up to us because they had that trust, and here we go. We can help them now, and they're going to accept our help. Or maybe somebody who's incapacitated, it's like all on the line, and you're like, I don't know, and they're refusing to go get any, evaluations done. They haven't been to a primary care physician in forever, and so we just don't even have a way to say to it, and our city or county attorneys and a judge to say, see, here's this proof that they don't have capacity. So sometimes once we have that historical, we can, proceed further to try to get them some help. And then there's also an invalid disposition, and that's when somebody makes the report and it seems like it's valid, and so we send it for investigation and the worker goes out, and then they find out that nope, it's not, it doesn't quite meet our criteria, so then you can go ahead and determine unfounded. Invalid, geez, sorry about that. And so what are the rights of adults? Margie hit on some of this earlier. They have the right to make decisions until they delegate that responsibility to another person, or until the court grants that to another person. Everybody has a right to be treated with dignity and respect. We all do, every single one of us, no matter how old we are. You have a right to refuse treatment and assistance, as long as you have the capacity to do that. Make your own choices about how you want to live, where you want to live, what you want to do. We're not there to judge you, we're there to help you, right? We're not, so, and also you have the right to privacy. So, in addition to that, according to the Virginia Administrative Code, APS is required to thoroughly investigate the APS report. And that is sometimes confusing for the APS workers when the client is like, no, I'm not participating in this. I don't want you here, da 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 da. But the worker can still proceed and do their investigation. Maybe they don't talk to the client, but they can talk to anybody else that they have knowledge of, or can ask around or call the reporter back. So yes, you can be an anonymous reporter, but if you go ahead and give your name and phone number or email address, the worker can reach out to you to ask some additional questions. And just know that your identity is always going to be kept confidential. So we're not telling anybody that you called unless you tell us it's okay to tell somebody that you called. So just know that and feel comfortable in that, because sometimes it really is, I can, as a worker myself, there were a lot of times I had to call a reporter back because the people who did intake didn't think to ask certain questions or try to just gain a little bit more knowledge about the situation. And as Marjorie said earlier, just remember, adults can, have the, if they have capacity, they got a right to make a bad decision. Is there anybody in this room that's never made a bad decision? Mr. Perfect. And so, I'm sorry, I don't even know your name, I'm picking on that. So also, there's so many times that, our families, the older we get, our kids might not agree with what we're doing. Quick little story for you, speaking of kids. I got Life 360. Does anybody know what that app is? I got it when my son got his driver's license. I got yelled at. I was a stalker. Nobody else's parents do this. All this stuff, right? When he graduated high school and was doing his own thing, I was like, if you want to get rid of 360, we can. He's like, are you kidding me? I need to know where you are. Seriously? You're the stalker now. Anyway, so there are some things that APS can't do. When people are like, well, APS didn't do anything. Well, there are some things we can't do. One is we cannot force protective services on somebody who just doesn't want our services if they have capacity. We can't take an endangered adult into custody. We don't have like these magic assisted livings and nursing home beds and shelters and little apartments that are all set up for us to take our clients to. Yeah, we don't have that magic wand and magic placements, but also the law says we can't take them into custody. So also we can't investigate when the alleged victim is no longer at risk. So if the risk has been removed, I don't mean to pick on CNAs, but I'm just use it as an example. If someone's in a nursing home and the alleged perpetrator is a CNA, and the facility decides to terminate that CNA or move them to another unit where they don't have access to that client, the risk is removed, right? So there's, we don't have to investigate any further. We can't make an arrest. We don't have that kind of power. We do not. And the fact that APS can't do some of these things is frustrating for some people. Margie kind of alluded to that earlier too. People are, as a regional consultant, We get calls from constituents and they're like, I called APS twice and they still haven't done anything. So we have to listen to what their concerns are. And sometimes it's a valid concern and maybe APS didn't, and maybe we need to provide some additional, education or, talk to the supervisor and the worker to try to help make sure that they have everything that they need to do their job successfully. But also, a lot of times it's just because of the confidentiality and they really can't tell the people what all was done or what conversations were had. So, APS didn't do anything. I hear that so many times. But what can APS do? We receive the report, we evaluate it for validity, we investigate the valid reports, we determine whether or not services are needed. We provide and refer such a wide array of services, not only what the adult services side might be able to, provide with community-based care and things like that, but also there's a ton of community resources outside of the Department of Social Services that we can refer to, as long as they agree that, if they have capacity and they say, yeah, definitely, I'll do that. And sometimes for you APS workers in the room, I don't know what your trick is, but when people are like, I do not want Meals on Wheels, I hear it's horrible. Just sometimes you can just have that conversation like, I know, I've heard that too, but do you have pepper? You just add a little extra pepper, it might season it up a bit. How about we try it for 2 weeks? Try it for 2 weeks, nothing's written in stone, right? Let's try it. If you hate it, okay, we'll revisit and we'll come up with something else. But we gotta make sure you have some nutrition. I'm just giving that as an example. Make a disposition, we notify the reporter with that letter that I was mentioning earlier. We can refer cases to prosecution, and we can refer them to regulatory agencies and other agencies for like the Department of Health, Office of Licensure and Certification, DSS licensing for ALFs, DDHDS for mental health services, IDD. We can help strengthen the informal support systems that I was mentioning earlier. Some people have none, some people have some. We can strengthen those that are in place, or we can try to help them formulate some. Obtain emergency orders when that is needed or necessary, and providing legal intervention is the last resort, with maybe guardianship or conservatorship if needed. So what else can APS do? We refer to adult services. Has anybody ever had a client that had a companion chore or homemaker? So you're somewhat familiar with it. How about someone who needed long-term services and support screening in order to go into a nursing home or PACE or get personal care in the home, if they have Medicaid or are going to be Medicaid eligible, assisted living facility assessments and reassessments. Also, some localities have adult foster care, and it's beautiful. If any of you are interested in looking into that, it works out really well for the agencies who have developed their program and have recruited some really awesome foster care providers. It works out real well. We also do guardianship tracking. The guardians, they send the annual reports and we review those, and then of course APS prevention as well. So this is just a slide, some statistics for you, and these were the substantiated ones, the ones that had that preponderance of evidence that I was mentioning earlier. And remember when I told you that our highest number of reports is self-neglect? Well, the highest number of substantiated are also self-neglect. We had over 8,700 substantiated cases in fiscal year 22. So also see that really super low number of sex abuse. What do you think might be the cause of that? Underreporting, exactly. People are embarrassed, or they just, don't, or people don't know about it because they keep it a secret, things like that. So although that's like that, I'm sure it's not as high as self-neglect or anything, but I always wonder about that figure, to be honest with you. So we did have a total of 14,197 substantiated reports last year. And earlier I was mentioning that we had 24,000 and some reports. So here is a list that's probably hard to see up there, but the PowerPoint is online. But we had 27,918 services that were provided by Adult Services and Adult Protective Services. These figures are pulled from the service plan. So as long as the workers are filling out the service plan with the appropriate services, which we would love for all of you to do on a regular basis, we can show people the amazing work and wonderful work that you do in your community and the state as a whole. So it's very important that those service plans are done completely and accurately. And this is amazing. Look, this says 4,238 folks were served by the companion program. That's pretty cool. Maybe more. Case management services, monitoring, advocacy, assisted living placement, emergency assistance, all those types of things. This is just like some of the top ones. So, okay, and I'm going to turn it back over to Margie. And I'm going to walk around and give you guys stuff.
All right. Just wanted to mention that May is a really exciting month in the world of adult abuse prevention. May is Adult Abuse Prevention Month in Virginia. You might see people with little purple ribbons. Purple is our color for adult abuse prevention awareness. And here he's giving out some little ribbons for you. The Governor Yenkin did sign a proclamation making this month May as Adult Abuse Prevention Month. And just as another tidbit, June 15th is World Elder Abuse Awareness Day. And there is just oodles of stuff on their website. It's called WeAd. And you can go on there, and they have a lot of free information, resources that you can ask for. So we're in an exciting time right now, and some of you may know I work very closely with the Virginia Coalition on the Prevention of Elder Abuse, VCPEA, and we're having our annual conference in a couple of weeks in Virginia Beach. And is anybody planning to go to that one? Okay. We felt really bad this year because we filled up the day after the early bird session closed. It was mid-February, and I have a notion a lot of that is because people have access to those 2 federal pots of money that can be used for conferences. But that's going to be a great time as well. And if you didn't get in this year, please try next year. That's all we have. It's been fun. And questions? Yes, sir.
I think that the big list that was just shown of all the things that Adult Protective Services does, each one of those things are important. But I think equally important is the fact that when APS is involved, it is obvious to neighbors, it is obvious to somebody who may be on the verge of committing some abuse, that there's eyes on this person.
Absolutely.
There's eyes on this person that have connections with the police department, there's eyes on this person that have connections with the prosecutor's office, and I think there's a blanket of protection that results from any of the activities that your agencies do, and that is invaluable.
Well, thank you for your comment. Yes, I really do believe as well when folks get involved, and the APS workers who they are so wonderful when they go out and do their things. And I hope you learned from this presentation, those of you who didn't know, all the other things that APS workers do as part of the investigation and provision of services. But yes, having eyes on somebody, as you say, yeah, I think that really helps, definitely. Yes.
Thank you, great presentation. I run a volunteer rides program, and our drivers are not paid. I'm really curious, I haven't been able to find a straight answer. Are our volunteer drivers mandated reporters? I have 800, and we do 20,000 rides a year, and I'm trying to figure out if I need to train them all as mandated reporters. Would they fall in that category? They're not paid.
Here, would you help out with this one? Because they are serving most older adults.
Yes, but not for compensation, as volunteers strictly.
Right. I don't think the law addresses, separates anything as far as volunteers.
We brought into this before with ambulance drivers, which they should be mandated reporters, but only EMTs are. Unless it's changed.
Yeah, that section that covers it.
I think online, I've gone to my board with this. That's actually, I drove here from Fairfax County for this.
Here we go. Yeah, see, this helps. In-person employee or contracted with a public or private agency or facility who works with adults in an administrative, supportive, or direct care capacity. Okay, any person providing full, intermittent, or occasional care to an adult with compensation, including but not limited to PMH or homemaker. Well, Nicole, do you have a thought on this? I would go by that next to the last bullet and say yes, but that is a good question. Carrie?
Yes.
Do you have any thoughts on volunteer drivers or adults being mandated reporters? They're not being paid.
Yeah.
But to me, I would say they fit that next to the last bullet, but
Says for compensation.
Yeah. The last one by their occasional care for adults in those driving responsibility. I would think so.
That's a great question. Can we take that back?
Yeah, I would think so, but also, we can definitely try to get
Yeah, we
clarification from our
certainly want
director.
to, like, policy.
But either way, like I'm sure you do like an orientation with them or a training with them. I would just, no matter, even if it's not,
They can be volunteer.
I would like highly encourage because, you know, a lot of things can happen in that transport van. You can hear stories, sometimes they're talking to each other. You might notice, especially if you're picking them up on a fairly regular basis, you can see a decline. You're gonna notice something before some other people might not, you know, so even if it's not,
I'll get your contact information and we will certainly check it. We'll get clarification. Yeah, I would say they follow the next to the last. That's just me, so let's, we'll get clarification. All right, that wraps up our session on what you need to know about APS. Our next session, we're just here late to start that. So if our next two presenters could come up here, we will get you mic'd up and ready. Let's give a hand to Carrie and Marjorie for a wonderful presentation.